Hi. How do we perceive the world around us? How do we move, interact with people, eat? If I ask this question from my students, most would say with our brain. It seems that brain is this magical black box that information enters into it, it gets processed there, and then here comes the outcome, the action, like walking, eating, or moving. But here's the puzzle. How does difflugia, a single cell without any nervous system or any brain, do many similar things? This tiny creature, which does not have any nervous system or any brain, can find its food, can create intricate protective shells, and can interact with the environment and thrives in its environment, all without any nervous system or a brain. If a brainless organism can do this all, maybe our sole emphasis on the brain as the sole seat of perception and action is a little bit of overstatement. And maybe we should rethink the way people understand and interact with the world. Let's take this idea a little bit further to something far more complex. The spirituality. The spirituality matters. We know it by many research that spirituality improves people's health, it strengthens their connections, and makes their life awesome. Actually, it's so fundamental for our beings that some psychologists call humans as biopsychosocial and spiritual beings. But how do we experience spirituality? The conventional understanding is this, that there are rituals, symbols, communal practices. They come into the magical brain, and it gets analyzed there, and then as an output, we get the spiritual feeling, the spiritual experience. You can think of it as a computer model. Information in, brain analysis, and output out. But this kind of understanding of how the brain works and how the spirituality works limits the way we understand spirituality, especially for people like me who like to understand spirituality in the real world and how it naturally unfolds. Think about meditation. If you try to, just for a few seconds, imagine someone who is doing meditation, what do you picture? You'll likely picture some monks. They are meditating in a serene place, and birds are singing, maybe water is flowing. But in research, when we have a brain-centric approach, when we are focused too much on the brain, it would usually look something like this: someone who puts a clunky EEG cap. Or you might end up lying motionless on an fMRI machine while a sound like this happens, a noise like this happens all around you. So it's a loud noise that distracts you and does not let you focus that much. It's not that much natural, it's not really the same. And this made me think maybe we should change our approach to something that can help us study spirituality, meditation, and so on in a more natural way. Let's rethink the computer model, the brain-centric approach, with a different metaphor, a radio. Unlike a computer, which receives the information passively and then generates the output, a radio attuned to the information actively, to the information that exists already out there in our environment. A radio does not require a central processor like a computer does. And the idea that our perception can be something like a radio, not a computer, is not that much new. It comes from ecological psychology, particularly works of James Gibson, who believed that our perception does not happen inside our heads, but it's with a dynamic relationship between the organism and its environment, a relationship consisting of our brain, our body, our actions, and all our environment and people around us. So, how do we understand spirituality? How can we experience spirituality? Is it like information, rituals, and symbols come into the brain and get analyzed, and then we see an output? Or it's more like a resonance and attunement to the information available out there? So we act like radios, we actively attune to the information and symbols out there, and then we reach the spiritual experience. This shift reminds me of the shift from geocentrism to heliocentrism. You see, for centuries, people believed that sun orbited the Earth because it fell into it. And this limited our understanding of how reality actually works. And today, we have the same kind of issue with brain centrism. The idea that all perception, particularly spirituality, starts and ends with the brain. So maybe if you're able to change our perspective a little, that help us to study spirituality a little bit more convenient and to be able to take more advantage of spiritual practices. Take Salat. It is an Islamic practice. It's a deeply communal and spiritual practice for people. And as you see, it consists of different rounds and different moves, particularly bowing and prostrating and so on. And when I was doing neuroscience studies, I was fascinated by the idea of studying this into an fMRI scanners as I previously did with some other spiritual practices. But this was impossible. The constraints of fMRI machine that, for example, you need to be motionless, was not compatible with a spiritual practice like this. And not mentioning the expensiveness of it and the technological challenges that comes into usually the brain studies. So I need to take a different approach, maybe a radio approach, to be able to study this practice. So instead of focusing on the brain, I try to take a radio perspective. And by this new perspective, instead of doing brain imaging, I were able to use wearable devices that collect movement, heart rate data, people's special location. And with these, we were able to see new insights into how these spiritual practices work. We were able to see that people actually work like radios. So all people movements aligned to each other, their bodies synchronized, and even their physiological states attuned to each other, just like a group of radios are tuning into the same frequency. And this attunement, this resonance that happens between the group of people who are doing this spiritual practice, is actually the thing that makes people spiritually united, makes people feel that spirituality. So by focusing less on the brain and focusing more on our bodies, our relationship with others, and the way we move and interact with each other, we are able to see a more complete picture of what's happening in the spiritual practices. Then the question will become not just what happens in the brain during spirituality, but how spirituality emerges naturally while people are doing that practice. So, what does this mean for understanding spirituality and for studying spirituality? With this new approach, we can use wearable devices like smartwatches, devices that tells us your location, your heart rate, your skin conductance, to study spirituality in real time, naturally, in a way that is convenient for people. We can understand how their body moves, what we call embodiedness, their actions, and their environment, which all together gives us much more information than just isolated brain signals. And it helps us to understand spirituality much more better. But what does this mean for you as people who might be interested in spiritual practices like meditation? Here is the thing. Currently, mindfulness and spirituality is framed in a way that it's like taming your brain. So meditation apps and courses, they try to help you to use meditation to calm your mind, which is awesome, which is very good, and we know by many research that is definitely helpful. But let's be honest, meditation can be boring, can be sometimes frustrating, and hard to stick with. But spirituality does not need to be like this. It can be joyful, it can be communal, it can be active. You might decide to experience spirituality in the way that Berlin dervishes do and dance ecstatically. Or even some people walk on fire in Spain. Or you might decide to relieve yourself, relieve your pain by mourning and crying like Shia people do in mourning rituals. All these can be ways to attain spirituality. If we take such an approach, which moves us away from the brain-centered approach, which only focuses on the mind and calming the mind, and we try to involve our bodies, our actions into the story, then we can achieve many more opportunities for reaching spirituality. Spirituality does not have to be something that we achieve by only closing our eyes silently into a quiet room, but it can be achieved by moving, by dancing, by interacting with other people. You can choose the spirituality that emotionally is resonant with you, that is natural to you, and aligns with who you are. So, as scientists who like to study spirituality, and as practitioners who like to experience spiritual feelings and calmness, we should ask ourselves, how much brain do we need to study spirituality, to experience spirituality? And the answer is simple: less than we think. Brain is important, there's no doubt in that. But it's only one part of the story. Spirituality is not bound to brain as music is not bound to strings of an instrument. Spirituality is in the dynamic relationship that we have with our environments, our peers, our friends, and the way we act and move. So achieving spirituality should not be hard and challenging and even boring. We can experience spirituality by music of a prayer, by rhythm of a dance, or even by tears of mourning. Thank you.